Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in 2 minutes. For those of you just joining, please check out our first poll and let us know where you're at in your journey. Also, as you navigate through this webinar, we've got a questions section. We also have a chat. Thanks for those that are sharing where they're calling in from. We've got really good representation. Okay, so for all those just joining, we're getting started in 1 minute. Welcome, we're glad you're here. Please take the poll question. Okay, it's time to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashley Mendez-Espinosa. I'll be moderating this webinar today, and you have joined From Credentialing to Compensation, a roadmap for pharmacy clinical service success. I wanted to welcome our special guest, Preston Cranford, and for the welcome here today, I'm so glad we are at a large number of registrants, and so we have folks helping us moderate both the chat and the questions. So please, if your question does not get answered, feel free to speak up or put it in there to make sure that your question gets answered. So that's for some housekeeping. This webinar is scheduled for an hour, and we likely won't go that entire time, so we do have time for questions at the end. As I mentioned, my name is Ashley Mendez-Espinosa. I'm a pharmacist, and I am the Vice President of Administration and External Affairs at DocStation. I've been with DocStation about 3 years, and my job with administration is helping us do things like this, partner with folks, including external affairs with pharmacy schools, state organizations. I saw a number of our favorite state organization leaders registered for this, so I hope you're here, and hi. And pharmacy schools, groups that represent pharmacies. So if you are one of those and we have not yet connected on how we can provide value, both from the DocStation side and the credentialing side, we'd love to chat. And the reason why we wanted to have this webinar today is part of my job is with external affairs and partnering with others is finding folks who can also help pharmacies be successful. DocStation is an important part of the puzzle. And credentialing, we recognize, is one of those. We have a number of subject matter experts within the DocStation team, and we even consider, is this something that we ought to do with the amount of time, attention, detail that it requires? We knew that we wanted to partner with somebody in order to do that. And if you saw a recent post that I put on LinkedIn, I have worked to partner with others and have failed, not once, but twice. And so when we got connected to the ProviderCSAO group, it has been a joy and it has been a relief. And this is just a friendship that is in the name of advancing pharmacy provider status. There's a quote that I wanted to share about credentialing as we kick this off. Credentialing is not a barrier to entry. It's a rite of passage on the path to provider status. So with that, I want to welcome our special guest, Preston Cranford. Preston, can you introduce yourself to us?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having us on, Ashley, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Preston Cranford. I'm the CEO of ProviderCSAO. We help pharmacists manage the credentialing and the medical contracting required to build a robust clinical practice. And thank you so much for having us on again.
I wanted to share our objectives for today, what we'll be going through. This is not for CE, but for as a good pharmacist, wanted to share what we'll be going through today. We wanted to demystify the credentialing versus enrollment process for pharmacists and pharmacies. And as we then navigate through and assist others with navigating compliance requirements, both for various types of pharmacy practice settings, as well as different pharmacy practice types. Next, we're going to go into implementing clinical services. We'll touch on collaborative practice agreements, but talk about the intersection between credentialing and advanced clinical services. Next, we'll go into leveraging your credentialing to expand your services, improve patient care, and then lastly, to touch on financial implications and opportunities when you are properly credentialed. So I have a number of questions. I want to make this a bit kind of podcast style. I'd like to have this as a conversation, but I have a lot of questions for Preston. So Preston, I'm going to share a number of these, and if there's others that spur secondary questions, we'll be going into that. Before I jump into the first one last reminder, please take our poll questions. We will have a few throughout the time. The first question I have, Preston, for you is, we've gone through this together, both you and me, with DocStation customers, and I know that you do that with others. Can you explain the difference between credentialing and enrollment with payers in the context of pharmacy practice?
Yeah, definitely. So credentialing is more of an initial step to ensure that each pharmacist meets the standard necessary to provide patient care. Things like proving licensure as a pharmacist, a background check, making sure that you have your W-9s and DEAs in check. Enrolling, which I also will call contracting from time to time throughout this process, that is going to be directly with medical payers, includes negotiating rates, negotiating services, and executing the formal contract with each medical payer. And you asked why are both crucial. I would say they're separate but dependent processes. So credentialing does you no good if it doesn't end up in a contract, and contracting can't happen if there is no initial credentialing.
That is definitely crucial for one that relates to the other. So in your experience, I think we've got a lot of people that have joined because this is something that comes with a lot of it feels non-transparent at times. Every location is different. Every payer is different. What's the most common challenges pharmacists face during the credentialing and enrollment process, and how do you help folks overcome them?
Yeah, well, I think the most common challenge is the complexity of the whole process. The contracting process is winding and full of many steps and are difficult. We've been working with pharmacies for years and years now managing this, and every now and then we'll have to go to the drawing boards whenever a payer stumps us. And I think the process is complex on purpose. And think about it in terms of a PSAO. There are so many contracts that each pharmacy is going to have to be able to work with their whole patient population. And it becomes too burdensome for someone to handle while they're also trying to manage their business. They're also trying to help their patients. We're able to overcome a lot of that because our single focus is getting pharmacists credentialed and contracted and paid for the services that they provide.
Nice. Next question I have, just getting the logistics out of the way, like how does this happen is a lot of the things that I think people coming to this webinar want to know. Yeah. How long does the process typically take? Oh yeah. Well, if you're a pharmacist that's joining us today and you've met with me at all over the last couple of years, one thing that you've probably heard me say is that each payer has their own personality. Some payers have it very much so together. They're standardized. It can take 45, 60 days, and you can count on it being that timeline from start to finish. There are other medical payers that are all over the place. It can be 120 days, some even asking you to expect for half a year. So it's a lengthy process. And ultimately, one of our goals here at ProviderCSAO is to help payers standardize that on the back end for pharmacies. Do you ever know, like, if you've done it before, do you help people? Do you say, let's start here because this one's going to be faster? Or do they all happen in parallel when you do intake for the payers of interest? Yeah, so normally what we're going to do is we're going to have a pharmacy look at their patient population and see what is most important to them. If it is a payer that takes 180 days, it'll be 180 whether we start today or we start
3 months from now. So we always say, look at your patient population, see what you're going to get the most value out of. And that's how you should approach choosing which medical payers to credential and contract with.
Okay, thanks. Last question I have in this logistics and basics section is, how does the credentialing and enrollment process impact a pharmacy's ability to expand services and get paid for services? Okay.
So I'm hearing two different questions in there. I'm going to answer the first one first. So as far as expanding services, this process allows a pharmacy to bill for far more services than pharmacists were able to do through a PTAN with traditional Medicare. Commercial payers, and this is including plans that execute Medicare Advantage, will reimburse pharmacies for far more than just the DSME and vaccines that we commonly hear about. We help pharmacies expand by setting up contracts that reimburse them for each consultation that they're doing, that they're having with that patient. And, we're seeing pharmacies expand into all sorts of different services from, we have people doing the vaccine consults, MedSync and MedRec consults, GLP-1 consultations. There's all sorts of different services that a pharmacist can expand into. On the second question, with the paid for services, we set our pharmacists up directly with fee for service models. So every time that you do provide that consultation, you're getting reimbursed for it. And it pairs up great with a great billing solution like DocStation. Makes it really seamless.
Thanks. We see a number of DocStation customers as well getting paid for consultations, and it has been the joy of my career to see positive payer behavior in that realm, because since pharmacy school, and of course on the shoulders of those who I stand, have been talking about paid for your time, paid for your expertise, and it's just so exciting for a pharmacy practice. A note about that with getting paid for consultations, we have seen folks, DocStation customers, even prior to full enrollment credentialing, be able to expand those services. And similar to that quote that I mentioned, that rite of passage, it is always a good idea to go down that enrollment credentialing. And we see people do that in parallel with starting their clinical services rather than waiting for that. I wanted to mention that just from the DocStation side. Okay, I know we have that second poll up, so take that if you haven't already. And this next section, I wanted to talk more about the process, compliance elements. This isn't just something to get through, but also helps you identify yourself as a practitioner, and there are compliance elements. So the first question I have is, what are the key differences between credentialing for a retail community pharmacy versus other types of pharmacy practice settings, and how do compliance requirements differ?
Yeah, well, without digging too much into like different taxonomies, which actually we could sit down and have a whole nother webinar over one day.
Okay, take step two. That's what, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any retail pharmacy that is offering clinical services is considered a clinical pharmacy. So it's not as much so as a direct label, but what you're doing with your practice.
Great. So it is, while not all pharmacies are created equal, getting to that taxonomy piece, which that would be an interesting poll question, like interested in a round two, audience members. Mm-hmm. But because we have a pharmacist is a pharmacist, that is likely what is leaned on versus where they practice. Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question I have in this section is, can you walk us through the steps that you would take to ensure ongoing compliance with credentialing requirements for pharmacists who work at a pharmacy? I know that there's that initial big step. That's what a lot of people focus on, but the deeper I've dove into credentialing, the ongoing steps are just as important.
Yeah, definitely. It can be difficult keeping up with all the instances of compliance and contracting with the back-end steps. I mean, you have to take into account reattestations, recredentialing, keeping track of all your license, your DEA, your pharmacy insurance. And that's one of the reasons why we're here to help and manage these situations for our network. We have systems in place to make it easier. And I would say if you're a pharmacy that's struggling to get all of this information combined into one place, check out a group called Pharmacy Profiles. They're doing a really good job helping a lot of our pharmacists keep all of their documentation, the credentialing requirements that we're going to ask for all in one place, and makes things a lot easier.
Great shout out to our friends at Pharmacy Profiles.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let's talk a bit more about the compliance piece, because it sometimes feels like a hotbed. Describe a situation where you had to address a compliance issue related to credentialing. How'd you handle it? What was the outcome? I'm certain you've seen a number of landmines and or stepped on them. And so how have you helped people along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we deal with things like this all the time. I mean, we just had a pharmacist that had a license expire, and all we can do on our end is be as transparent with each pharmacist that we work with, and help them get it resolved as best as possible. Like our pharmacist had a license that had expired, and it messed up their entire credentialing databases. We worked with them to make sure that it was reinstated in a timely manner. We held their hand along the way, and got our ball to continue rolling once that was fixed.
What about, I would hope that, folks are staying on top of that. That could happen to anybody, I suppose. How about other things? I hear people that come to the DocStation who have had work done by others. And can you give an example of, it always seems like there's something to be fixed. And it's not necessarily with just credentialing or just enrollment. When folks are switching around or working with different partners, there always seems like something to be fixed. Can you give me an example of something that needed to be fixed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's easy because I would say about 50% of our customer base either has tried to do it themselves or comes from a company that had previously helped them. Almost every single time there's going to be some kind of an error in the database. I mean, luckily our team has managed hundreds of credentialing databases at this point. So they're used to picking up the pieces and putting them together. But without effective credentialing, you're not going to ever be considered by any payers. So making sure that it's done correctly has a huge effect on the outcome long term.
Would you, if you were to guess, does it add to those 180 days or however many days? Is that something that's able to be overcome quickly, or what's your ballpark on sometimes if that adds to the time?
Yeah, definitely. So there are errors in the credentialing database itself, and then there's errors with the information loaded into the credentialing database. If it can be something as small as, hey, we have documents formatted incorrectly, or we have a wrong setup with our W-9s or DEAs. That's a lot of the times really easy and quick to fix. I mean, our team will have that fixed quick. The ones that can take a little bit more time is if, say, that they had an insurance that expired, and those can take a little bit of time, but we really work hard to make sure that our pharmacists know that we're there through step by step to make sure that gets resolved.
Yeah, I've noticed that you guys go into bat for folks, and the how do I want to describe this? Yeah, folks come kind of tuckered out of like, I've gone through so much even before starting now, and there's that sunk cost fallacy of like, oh man, is it worth starting again? And it is, and so that's I think a point of hope there. All right, we do have our next poll up. I saw in the chat there, and I wanted to bring us to our last question in this section. Actually, that's kind of what I asked as a follow-up there. So about improper credentialing or enrollment and how it affects folks. Feel free to touch on that if there's anything left to say, but I wanted to bring us to, with that release of the poll comes clinical services talk. So we know how to get credentialed and enrolled. Now, what do we do as we activate our provider status?
Well, heck, I mean, I would say we start offering clinical services. I mean, usually once we get to this point with a pharmacy, they'll have a medical billing software set up already, but there's still a lot of work to be done in the software themselves, from EDIs to ERAs and data flows. And that's one of the things we love about DocStation that to us elevates them among other medical billers. And DocStation just makes that part of the process so easy. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about the pharmacist experience with DocStation and once y'all get started with them, what that looks like?
Yeah. A lot of folks ask, what's it feel like? How fast is it to get onboarded? And usually I start with, well, if you want to log in, I can get you a login today. That's on the DocStation platform. And what we start folks with, similar to the paperwork that you mentioned, and the wait times, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days for EDI enrollments and the types of things that technically connect you to from DocStation, from your pharmacy practice over to the payer. There are a number of different types of enrollments. And those are the EDI enrollments saying, I'm a practitioner / pharmacy, and I'm going to submit to you, Blue Cross of wherever. And I want you to recognize when I submit something. And then another type of enrollment is getting the gold standard of medical billing feedback, the electronic remittance advice. So ERA enrollment. Those steps, we do that paperwork for customers of DocStation. And it can take a number of days to weeks, can also take months. So that's why we do that right away. So that the waiting time for that is spent while we're doing your training, while you're doing your onboarding, while we're getting templates set up and empowering your practice to start providing these services. And you can document. We're stating many times while you get set up. So the wait time is really time that we take advantage of to fully get folks trained, onboarded, getting their other team members, et cetera. So you get on really fast and you can start providing clinical services. And so I know that we're talking about one than the other, but it's worth repeating that folks can start offering clinical services while getting enrolled and credentialed. So that's a little bit of our process. Thank you for that question. And thank you for the positive feedback on our process. I think that is important, doing a number of those things for our customers and getting them connected to payers.
Yeah, I think it's an unsung benefit that a lot of pharmacists probably don't even know that y'all are doing for them. But it really makes the world of a difference. It makes our job a lot easier as well.
Thanks. A lot of the folks that we work with, I like to tell folks that our bread and butter is working to empower pharmacists individually and uniquely to provide clinical services. So operating up on their license independently. We do also have a number of customers who use collaborative practice agreements. Can you talk to us about folks that you work with collaborative practice agreement wise, now that we're talking about clinical services? Some folks lean on that. How does your organization handle collaborative practice agreements? And what's different when you credential, when you see that that's the case?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll say we assist pharmacies in setting up collaborative practice agreements. We lead them to the correct resources for it and make sure that they're comfortable operating under them. You know, collaborative practice agreements have been around for a long time. From understanding to the process to different state reporting requirements to providing the documentation required between you and the physician, we help our pharmacists through that. That's actually a part of being in our network that is free to those pharmacists. But actually, I do think it's important to remember long-term, you know, our goal for pharmacies is setting up a pathway for them to be reimbursed directly rather than through a CPA. So for instances where a CPA is required, especially whenever you're looking at remote patient monitoring or chronic care management, they're huge. But long-term, we hope to be able to do all of those directly with the payer.
Amen. Mm-hmm. All right. A question I get often, and you may get this too, it's a loaded one. So what do you tell people when they come to you and say, hey, I want to do this? What types of clinical services are recognized and reimbursable under the medical benefit for pharmacist provided care? Speaking of that independent practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, gosh. Well, there's a ton of services that pharmacists can provide. And there are a lot of those services that are already talked about, you know, vaccines, DSME, and even MTMs. But really the special thing that we found that pharmacists have been able to do through these commercial and Medicare Advantage contracts is billing for time spent with patients. So that's going to be through evaluation and management codes or preventative medicine codes. They're billed based on the time that you are spending with your patients, which a lot of pharmacists are already doing that, anywhere from 5 minutes to over an hour. And these codes are really exciting to us because they're very flexible. Pharmacists can use them in many different ways. So we have pharmacists that are in our network using these for, like time spent on a med rec prior to a med sync. We're doing GLP-1 consultations, the vaccine consults. So we view the evaluation and management codes as kind of the Swiss Army knife of CPT codes because it's different ICD-10 codes apply to different services that can be billed.
We see that too. I was just curious how you answered that because it's such a loaded question. I'm like, well, let's talk about what state you're in. Let's talk about provider status legislation. Are you connected to your state local organization? You really should be.
Yeah.
Join. And that's a note. I'm like, look, I can see the list of folks. And if you have not joined your state organization who is advocating on your behalf, creating this legislation that's empowering your practice, please join today.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that's a great point. Check in with what your state scope of practice is. If y'all do have questions over what all you're able to bill in your state, feel free to reach out to the DocStation or the ProviderCSAO team afterwards, and we can definitely help you with that.
Thanks. The next question that I see that we get, and it's more of a, how am I going to do this in my practice? It's like a workflow question. And at DocStation, we have such an user-friendly platform that I lean into the fact that, well, no one's going to do this for you. To document. And then lastly, that there are ways that we work to integrate that into workflow. How, when folks come to you with that question about their workflow, I know that you work with folks in the implementation of all of these things, not just I'm going to credential for you and walk away. You've got that seemingly a really wraparound service. So how do you answer that on how pharmacies seamlessly integrate clinical services into their existing operations without disrupting their workflow?
Yeah, and that's a great question because some pharmacists will view like, oh, I need to add new services, and that might be a barrier in their mind. But there's already a ton of services that pharmacists are doing that they don't know that they can get reimbursed for. Start with those offerings. Vaccines, bill vaccines medical, bill for your time. You already have a MedSync program in, you already have somebody calling all of those patients. Bill the telehealth E&M codes and bill those out as early. Then as you continue to grow your clinical practice, you find more time in your workflow, you can start offering some of the new services that historically have been unavailable to patients because they simply wasn't enough time or funding to do it. So start with what you're already doing and learn
That's
how
a huge one.
Maximize that.
Yeah, we say that a lot too. Where do I start? Well, let's start with what you're already doing. And for those that might still be saying, shall I get into this, or how am I going to do all of this? It's starting with what you're already doing is the answer. All right, next section, and we are excellent on time. Can you explain the key benefits and opportunities that credentialing and enrollment opens up for pharmacies? What is different about before and after? I've mentioned before, you can do these clinical services while this is in process, but Preston, when you see, since you work with folks during the process, that before and after, can you explain some of those opportunities that you see open up, like switches that flip and such?
Yeah, and I'm hearing a few questions in here as well, so actually hold me to answering all of them.
Okay.
But this is what really excites us for our members. Historically, pharmacists have only been able to bill for services covered by a PTAN in traditional Medicare, meaning that it's only a small portion of their patients. And as we're going along, it's seeming to be a smaller and smaller number of patients. So the first key benefit is that you're going to see expanded access to clinical reimbursement for all of your pharmacy patients, commercial and Med Advantage plans, patients. And as well, we also work with a ton of different MCOs and state Medicaids. The second key benefit is going to be access to provider style and reimbursements. And this means the fee-for-service model that I touched on a little bit earlier. Since there isn't federal or expansive federal provider status, there are very few services that a pharmacy could provide. But direct payer contracts are far more expansive. In terms of patient care, there have been so many studies done on what the value of adding a pharmacist to your care team does. Like, for example, it was just back in September, I believe, Pharmacy Times had put out a blog about how just adding a pharmacist to the care team resulted in a 10% reduction in A1C levels. So that's huge. And
preaching to the choir there. That benefit can never be understated. I think that continued contribution to the literature is really helpful. So thank you to all of our scientists and academicians who are contributing to that, who have joined today. Will I get this question too? Will pharmacists make more money if they're credentialed and enrolled?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that credentialing and contracting, you definitely get out what you put in. Yes, for a simple answer. Even looking at an entry of vaccines, billing a vaccine to the prescription benefit often results in really low reimbursements. I'll have pharmacies that come to me and their average immunization reimbursement is, $14, $15, $18, $20. And that is just not going to cut it for long-term survival of pharmacies. Our pharmacies are billing for the medical side for those vaccines, getting the additional admin fees that you get on the medical side, and as well billing for their time. And we're seeing about around a 600% increase in vaccine revenue from it.
Okay.
Yeah, our pharmacies also, they're leveraging contracts through our network to bring in like an extra $10,000, $20,000 each month by billing MTMs directly to payers, med reviews for payers. And as well, it helps a lot using a tool like DocStation, make sure that it fits into their workflow and helps guide them on correct ICD-10 codes and documentation. Which if you haven't heard Ashley yet, document.
Right. Regarding that documentation, that is one thing, DocStation, when you document clinically, we make it our job to know what codes to put, what dollars to put, and that helps for that documentation. So you don't have to know all of those things. Some of that can be done for you if you are clinically documenting. So I'm hearing pharmacists can and do make more money. Thanks for that stat with the 600%. That's eye-popping. So if I'm ready to invest in a partner to help me do that, what does your guys' service cost?
Yeah, definitely. So we have two different fee structures. We have our monthly network fees that are just for ongoing maintenance of your different payers, reattestations, recredentialings, as well as your general credentialings. We have that network fee, and then we also have what we consider or what we call a contract completion fee. And I think this is really important because if a pharmacist out there has dipped their toes into the water of credentialing and contracting before, one of the huge barriers that we hear is that there's huge upfront costs associated with getting into credentialing and contracting. At ProviderCSAO, we don't think that should be the case. Our goal is to align our incentives with the pharmacist. So we actually don't charge for a contract until it is completed and ready to bill. And we think that's important long-term for pharmacy because you're going to have small things. We have to deal with the same like pains that a physician will have to deal with, whether it's a network is full or they're working on infrastructure for pharmacists, small things like that. So we really believe that the contract completion fee and keyword completion is really important to our business model. And that's not to mention the sweet discounts that we give to our good friends using the DocStation portal. Nice.
With what you described about completion, cost, et cetera, that is the difference between a partner and a service. Is that partnership is the incentives being aligned. So thanks for going through that detail. Yeah. Well, let's see. So I'm getting to the end of my questions. We'll offer time for questions at the end. Get your questions into the questions section, please. All right, Preston, get out your crystal ball. how do you envision the future of credentialing enrollment for pharmacists? I have opinions on this, and this is really like, what's in the future for us? We've talked a lot about this is something you can do. This is a rite of passage. How we talked about how to do it. We talked about financial pieces, clinical pieces, but in the professional pharmacy, this is something that is so new that we're helping folks understand what is it. Is it important? Is it necessary? And so as we all move forward, take out your crystal ball and tell me what you see for the future of credentialing enrollment. And as we advance pharmacy practice, as we advance provider status, what do you see in the future for our profession?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to expand and become more and more important. At ProviderCSAO, we really want to improve two things: speed and access. We want to develop pathways to make payer enrollments quicker and more efficient. And whenever you look at access, we're already seeing more and more states open up new clinical services to pharmacies. What we need to do now is make sure that we're rising to the call as pharmacists. The best way to do that is by having a solid network of pharmacists that are as providers that are proving this value to patients and the healthcare system overall.
Yeah, that's that network word is something that is big for payers, where any one person, like, I can provide value to your patient, but the power in numbers, and a payer looking for a network saying, bring me a network. And that is definitely a part of that future. So that was just me digging into that first word there. For me, it's just looking like physician and mid-level providers. And so going through the things that they go through, something that you said, it made me think, if this is my thought on, we're going to look like providers, act like providers, et cetera, in order to be capital P providers, in the eyes of payers, that is. The piece about speed and access, or is that the two words you use? Speed and access.
Speed and access, correct.
Does that exist today on the physician and mid-level side? Do you think that their experience with credentialing enrollment has that they would associate speed and access as well? Like, if we're going towards looking like them, do our worlds align? Is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, so I would say that our roles do align. Whenever you're looking at like the physician side, they have to deal with the same pains that we deal with whenever it comes to dealing with medical insurances. I can't speak too much to the different groups that are there to improve speed and access for physicians. But one thing that I can say is that there are barriers in place right now, or not even barriers, small obstacles that we can easily get around as pharmacists already. And so coming in, like, what we want to do is just make it as easy as possible. We don't know if that is a one-step shop, like a PSAO per se, or if it is on our end, making sure that we're doing everything possible with the payer to speed that process along. So I would say in the same ballpark, but I do think that it is a little bit separate between pharmacists and physicians from the payer standpoint.
Gotcha. Thanks. Well, those are the formal questions that I have, and a couple of those informal follow-ups. I would like to do some questions from the audience, and so for the rest of our time, here's how it's going to look. Everyone, get in your questions. I've seen some come through. I haven't been able to watch all of that, but we have some folks attending to those questions. And so looking at the chat, looking at the poll, looking at poll questions now, as well as submitted questions. I do want to take time at the end, after getting through some of these, to do our key takeaways, next steps, give you resources. I saw that comment about, you didn't really say the price, LOL, but to provide that as a one pager in writing for everybody. I want to give everybody our contact information. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you, Preston, three pieces of advice. And if you were to give any attendee today, outside of how does it work, we can help you, et cetera, but 3 pieces of general advice as people are going down this road. So I will ask that at the very end, and that will be how we part. But at this moment, I would like to go into the questions. And so Randy and Kendall, who are helping us today, thank you, Randy and Kendall. Want to bring up some questions if there's any that we can answer on the fly. Let's see. How about I look in the group chat? Here's a good one. What's the difference between, this was just submitted, ProviderCSAO and DocStation? We are 2 different companies that perform important, that are two different partners for a pharmacist or pharmacies in order to activate their provider status. So DocStation is an EHR at our core. So we have your patient profiles, your documentation, document. I didn't even think that was going to be a theme of this. For providing care, we integrate with a number of dispensing platforms in order to do things like make sure that you don't have to rebuild profiles, automate certain things like drafting medical claims for you based on your dispensing activities, and getting claims out the door to the medical benefit. So ProviderCSAO is none of those things, and but you are many things. So Preston, go ahead and talk about the things that you do.
We I would say that DocStation and ProviderCSAO, we hold hands and go in the same direction. So we manage the credentialing, the contracting, the back end. Imagine that DocStation can provide you the tool to get to destination X, and ProviderCSAO makes sure that the engine's running on the back end. So we different. One good way to think about it would be whenever you're looking at your PMS transmits claims. You're able to document in it all the good things that you get out of a billing software. As for your PSAO, will go through and establish reimbursement rates for each of those services that you can do. So whenever DocStation sends a claim to a medical payer, they'll check that pharmacy's contract that they have, see what the reimbursement is for that service, and then that is what comes in on the ERA back to our friends at DocStation. So we work in tandem and kind of complete the circle of what I believe the medical side will be.
Yeah. Do they still ask that kind of question on the SATs? Like PMS is to PSAO as DocStation is to ProviderCSAO?
That's hilarious.
That was just something I saw that had just popped in so that we could chat about that, because that I think is worth a discussion versus some written things. I see Mark who popped in Pharmacy Profiles website. Check that out, everyone. Really great for that. We mentioned them a little bit earlier. If you were late to the webinar, this is also a fully recorded webinar. Now, background moderators, help us know where to go next here. Oh, here's a good one that came in. Preston, I think this one would be good for you. Are all of your clients tied to the same reimbursement, similar to a PSAO, or do you negotiate individually?
Say that one more time.
Are all of, when you take someone through enrollment and credentialing, the contract that they're a part of, a PSAO is like, we have contracts and we enroll you and everyone's in the same contract. Does that look the same for you?
So there's 2 different models. So currently at large, we're doing direct contracts between that pharmacy and that medical payer. Things that, whenever I was talking about earlier, expanding access and speed, we're piloting group contracts with different payers that will make the enrollment process a lot more seamless. And that will be more of a group PSAO style contract. And we're working on that with a number of payers right now. And until we get those live, we are setting up direct fee-for-service contracts with you and the medical insurance.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, in our physician and mid-level counterparts have those types of things too. Sometimes it's individual, but a lot of times it's through an MSO, negotiating that for a clinically integrated network.
Mm-hmm.
Friends, thank you for answering some of the recording questions. All right. I want to see if we can share. I'm like doing things on the fly now, and that's probably not the best to do. To see if we can share the results of some of these polls.
Oh, yeah.
I can take the poll. Next to the polls. Let's see here. I'm gonna get some help with poll sharing, but let me do more questions here. There are. Well, let me go up to the top here. I'm just going to do a question one. DocStation, do you require separate NPI numbers for each pharmacy to have access to the 835s or the claim info? We're struggling for reconciliation of medically billed claims. We have NPIs that are location based, and so for the 835s that would come in when we get those remits, it is for that NPI. Now, the part of this is it depends, right? Because I know that there are some payers that want to see the locations NPI as the billing provider on the claim. And there are some that are like, nope, I don't want the location. I want rendering provider and billing provider to be the same. And so in that scenario alone, I know that there are two NPIs that would then be on the well, either the same or two, depending on payer behavior and their preferences of how many NPIs would be on a claim and requiring different numbers. But another angle for answering that is every practice setting, or if you are a multi-location owner, and every store is going to have its own NPI as well. I hope I answered that question for you, Natalie.
And I actually think that's important to also bring up about the type 1 NPIs. Each pharmacist, if they're going through this process, should also consider setting up a type 1 NPI for themselves. Because whenever you're looking at credentialing, especially for consultative services, they want to make sure that the person that's giving that consultation, they've approved of. You can't do that through a type 2 NPI because that is going to be for your location. So if you are interested in getting into these services, also consider make sure that you're set up with a type 1 NPI.
Put a star next to that. If you don't have a type 1 NPI, as a practitioner, get a type 1 NPI. The next question I want to take us to is Emily Zadberney from Colorado, where I live, and one of those state execs that I mentioned. Thanks for your question, Emily. What part does the CAQH platform have in your process? Do you feel that it's important for pharmacists to complete that? This is a similar question to pharmacy profiles. So yeah. CAQH, where does it fit in?
Yeah, definitely. So each pair will have their own preferred route. So a good place to start, like Ashley just said, pharmacy profiles get everything pulled into one area. Second, each pair will have their own platform that they want to use. So you're either going to hear CAQH, you might hear Availity. There's a number of other ones as well that we utilize. And some payers want to credential directly with them. So they have their own processes. They have their own screening backgrounds that they want to do. I would say CAQH is as important as any other credentialing database. They're probably the largest pull from payers currently. If you came onto our network and you already had your CAQH built out perfect, we would say thank you. So yes, I would say to continue your reattestations with CAQH. And I get why you might not want to, because it can be annoying whenever you're getting all these alerts. Hey, this is expiring. This is incorrect. You can't complete the portal. If you are having problems with that, feel free to reach out to our team. Our credentialing team manages that all the time.
Great. It's good to know that there's help there. A question from Alexandra. Do you work with or have experience with pharmacists that are on the team with a home care agency? I can answer that a little bit and wanted to talk about you.
Yeah, we do. We have pharmacies that are doing all sorts of different home health services and breaking into like the different coding it depends on what you're looking for here. We do have pharmacists that are doing that. There are different codes that you're going to be utilizing. DocStation makes place of service codes also very simple. But it is going to be a pretty similar process to what we're used to.
Great. I'm looking at for more submissions. Looks like we've got a lot of direct answers. Thank you. I'm going to the big group chat here. Oh, people can see the poll results. Excellent. I like that Mark tossed in here that NCQA standards require that type 1 NPI. So I mentioned put a star next to that, put a second star next to that. You need a type 1 NPI. Looks like a ProviderCSAO teammate is mentioning about getting help with CAQH. So if you're stuck, that's another tool that you have in your tool belt if looking for a partner. I'm looking for, I can't see the poll results though, so I'm curious about that. Maybe if, you know what, I think that I just need to submit a.
You know what, I actually see a good question here that I think would be good for the audience. If a pharmacist is credentialed with their Medicare Part B for immunizations, does this also allow them to get reimbursed for Medicare Advantage? Traditional Medicare is completely separate for Medicare Advantage. For traditional Medicare, you're going to need to be set up with a PTAN, and that will only give you access to those traditional Medicare patients. Medicare Advantage plans are all executed by commercial payers. So you have to go through the same type of credentialing and contracting process that we've been discussing with each individual Medicare Advantage payer to be reimbursed for them. You do have the ability to build Med D plan, but I wouldn't, because you're shooting yourself in the foot by taking about 15% of the reimbursement that you should be.
That's a great clarification with Med B and Med Advantage and navigating for Medicare aged patients. So it's after I submitted, I can see some of these, the polling questions. So I'm really glad that we went in and talked a lot about process, because understanding the process was that top result there. Where are you in your credentialing journey? Pretty almost evenly spread, a lot, but the biggest is haven't started yet. So I'm glad that this is good validation for some of the things we touched on. Which clinical services are you most interested in providing? Top one being MTMs, and close next three are that, CDTM, chronic disease therapy management, immunizations, point of care testing, post pandemic. This is, I think, one of the biggest things that patients know and expect, not just immunizations, but clinical services, and the things that can and do get billed to the medical benefit. All right. With the time we have, because I want to give people a few minutes to get to wherever they're going next to let us go early, I would love to see, as the last thing I'm going to do is ask. Oh, thanks, Teresa. The last thing I'm going to do is ask Preston for words of wisdom. But while we are kicking that up here in the chat, we mentioned that part 2. And for things that you're like, I want to know more about this, I didn't quite get this answered. If you were to want to attend a part 2, what would you want to touch on? I would love to see in the chat or in the question some of your ideas. Whether it's diving deeper, something not touched on, or other things. While folks are doing that, Preston, your last 3 parting words of wisdom, anything regarding this process.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been thinking a lot about this since we had agreed to do this webinar. And once again, thank you so much for having me on. I've been thinking about it a lot. The 3 pieces of advice that I want to make sure that pharmacists are taking home with this. The first one, don't be scared. Try new services, try new codes. If you bill out a claim, the worst thing that you're going to get is a rejection. So first piece, don't be scared, try new things. My second one, if you haven't heard us in here enough, document everything. This is what they're going to look for in a medical audit. So make sure that you're doing more than you think is necessary to protect your business. As well, if you're not utilizing DocStation's documentation tool, they have a great one. My third piece of advice is going to be strike while the iron's hot. Historically, there's this feeling across the industry that vaccine season is the most important and only time to be billing for clinical services. And that's not true anymore. There are services that can be billed year round and not just vaccine season. And if you are interested in learning about some of those services, feel free to reach out to our team. We have a list of them, and they do vary state by state. But strike while the iron's hot.
The two things that I know it's up to three, but I have two main things to leave you with. First is the quote that I started with, and that is, credentialing is not a barrier to entry. It's a rite of passage on the path to provider status. So just echoing that, don't be scared, try new things, strike while the iron's hot. I think that goes along with that. The last thing that I want to share is a quote saying, credentialing happens in parallel to enabling your team and your practice to provide and get paid for direct patient care. It happens in parallel. So you providing that care is that main thing. So it feels like there's a lot of things to do, but think about how you were trained, what you were built to do, maybe your purpose in career or in life is to care for others, drive value, improve people's health. And that's why you do what you do. And perhaps that's why you're here. And this is an important step along the way. And so there's many things, but you providing that access to patients and that care to patients is number one. Well, I see some of these things coming in here, and please take a look at the chat. So direct contact information. You're like, I have a follow-up question. There's some email addresses there. I'd like to learn a little bit more. There's some websites there for you. And with that, I will end us just a few minutes early so you can get to where you're going next. Thanks everybody for your time, your attention, your attendance, and your questions. And perhaps we'll see you again for part 2.
Thank you all.